He's fronted MasterChef for 2 decades, but John Torode, like his now former co-presenter Gregg Wallace, is facing questions over his conduct. In production company Banijay's report into Wallace, it's alleged that in 2019, another individual used racist language. In an Instagram post, Torode has admitted this pertains to him, but offered no apology, writing, "I have absolutely no recollection of any of this, and I do not believe that it happened. However, I want to be clear that I've always had the view that any racial language is wholly unacceptable in any environment. I'm shocked and saddened by the allegation, as I would never wish to cause anyone any offence." An entire series of the programme fronted by the pair was filmed last year and is still awaiting transmission. It's unclear if the series will ever be broadcast now by the BBC, with both hosts' behaviour in question. Separately, the BBC has today published its annual report, giving licence fee payers an insight into spending on salaries. Only those earning £178,000 and above are listed, with departing hosts Gary Lineker and Zoe Ball topping the rankings for a final time. Gary Lineker earned just over £1,350,000, with Zoe Ball on just over £515,000. The next highest was Match of the Day pundit Alan Shearer on almost £450,000, followed by Radio 1 breakfast host Greg James on nearly £430,000, and Today presenter Nick Robinson and Question Time host Fiona Bruce on just over £410,000. But the report doesn't actually give a full picture of presenter remittance, with familiar faces like Claudia Winkleman, Graham Norton, Stacey Solomon and Michael McIntyre not listed, as they're engaged by production companies and not employed by the BBC. The same applies for actors in co-produced dramas and comedies like Doctor Who and Gavin and Stacey, so as to ensure a level playing field for the BBC to compete in the commercial market. Actors in continuing dramas like EastEnders and Call the Midwife are also not disclosed. Additionally, the report doesn't give a full picture for employees, like radio host Vernon Kay on £390,000, as their additional fees for guest hosting programmes like The One Show are not included. Similarly, news presenters like Clive Myrie, who also present travel shows, and Amal Rajan, who fronts University Challenge, do not have to disclose their fees for entertainment and documentary programmes. Overall, the report paints an optimistic portrait of the corporation, with viewing figures and audience reach up across platforms. Despite restructuring and redundancies, the output is seemingly healthy, with 10 out of 10 of the most watched shows on Christmas Day in the UK being on the BBC, including Gavin and Stacey's finale, which was the most watched scripted TV show of the century. It also claims that for every £1 they spend, £2.63 is generated in the UK economy. But those positives may be overshadowed by the continuing growth in high salaries and the management's very public failures in the past year to properly grip scandals like Hugh Edwards, the Gaza documentary How to Survive a War Zone, broadcasting chants from Glastonbury which are now subject to a police investigation, and Gregg Wallace.
Joining us to discuss this report is Dorothy Byrne, President of Murray Edwards College, Cambridge, and former head of news and current affairs at Channel 4. Dorothy, before we turn to the report, what do you make of production company Banijay's investigation into MasterChef?
Seems to have been a very good investigation, and it has found that 45 complaints have been upheld. And we also know, of course, that BBC News has carried out a separate investigation, and a number of the complainants there seem to be additional. So what we have here is really an extraordinary number of complaints over a 20-year period, which is very concerning.
You've previously spoken out about the behaviour of men in particular in this industry. Why do you think they're still abusing their positions like this over such a long period?
Because they have got away with it. Men who behave badly will continue to behave badly for as long as they can get away with it. It is extraordinary that Gregg Wallace has a 20-year record, but many other men who have been revealed to have behaved in inappropriate ways also had long records. So the answer is that they should be exposed. And I think it's only when men see other men being exposed that they will stop.
And with both presenters now in trouble for their conduct, what should the BBC do with the unaired series of the programme?
The problem with MasterChef is very tricky because it's a unique program in many ways, in that it can make a new chef's complete career. And it would be a tragedy for the people involved as contestants if the program wasn't shown. However, I don't see how the BBC can show it, at least on terrestrial television. And I think they should look in an inventive way at potentially showing it minus Gregg Wallace. That might sound strange, but there are lots of brainy people at the BBC who could put their minds to trying.
And does the BBC need to have greater oversight of production companies like Banijay, which it uses increasingly for its output?
Well, Channel 4, ITV, many broadcasters and streamers use independent production companies. The key point is that ultimate responsibility is with the broadcaster. The BBC, in my view, should potentially have done this investigation itself, because to the public, it's a BBC programme.
And turning now to the corporation's annual report, what are your initial observations?
I was surprised to see in the report that the BBC has done financially quite a bit better than we might have expected. And there is a lot of good news in there for the BBC about it being a trusted organisation still with viewers, about its reach digitally, exceeding what it did before. But the problem it's got is that everything is overshadowed by its recent, I would say, very basic errors.
Just on the finances, the BBC says its output is more watched and further reaching, but 300,000 households have stopped paying the licence fee. Is the funding model broken?
The funding model as it is does not work because fewer people are prepared to pay the licence fee, and there is a fall in terrestrial viewing figures. However, it's a bit like what Churchill said about democracy, that it was the least bad method of government anybody could think of. The licence fee is better than direct taxation or better than subscription. But I think reforming the licence fee so that the king doesn't pay the same as a poor pensioner is a good idea.
And in terms of management, there have been a series of scandals this past year, from Hugh Edwards to the Gaza documentary and the failing to moderate Glastonbury's output. What is going wrong with the executive wing of the BBC?
It's very hard for those of us outside the BBC to know why they keep making these basic mistakes. But an issue that was revealed in the Gaza report was that there were two people who were commissioning the programme, and it was unclear who had responsibility, and a third person was asking the key questions. So I would almost say in the BBC, it's as if too many people work there, and it's almost amusing that the BBC's answer to what it got wrong with Gaza has been that it's going to employ another, presumably highly paid, director to oversee long-form current affairs documentaries. I think adding another person in is the wrong thing to do.
Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, has been surprisingly vocal in her criticism of Tim Davie and the corporation's management. Is it fair, or is she in danger of amplifying criticism from commercial rivals?
I don't think it is fair of Lisa Nandy to call what has happened catastrophic. The BBC has made a series of really stupid and basic mistakes, and it does show organisational failure, but these have not been catastrophes. The BBC is a huge organisation whose brilliant journalists and freelance staff are creating marvellous programmes every day, thousands of hours. Of course, they will make mistakes, and we must be careful not to exaggerate what they've got wrong.
And earlier this year, the BBC's Workplace Culture Review found no evidence of a toxic culture, but suggested areas of improvement. How important is it for management to get a firmer grip to keep the organisation going now and ensure its future with such big threats from the likes of streamers?
I think for the staff and the freelance people working at the BBC, now must be a very difficult time. They see themselves being attacked on a daily basis. And I think it's going to be very important that the management engender within people a sense of confidence, but also a belief in them that they will be treated fairly at work and will not suffer the sorts of harassment and inappropriate behaviour that we have heard about recently.
Dorothy Byrne, President of Murray Edwards College, thank you very much.
Thank you.